makes up 20% of the exam. This is one of the largest sections, so make sure that you feel comfortable with the content in this section. You can expect about 12 questions on the exam that deal with configuration and setup. As a Salesforce admin, much of your time will be spent in the setup menu. Thus, it is important to know what you can find and configure in setup. In order to get to the setup menu while logged into Salesforce, click on the gear icon in the upper right, and then click on Setup. If you do not currently have access to Salesforce, you can create a Developer Edition org for free, which just takes a few minutes. I'll link to a video here to walk you through that so that you can follow along with this video and prepare for the exam. Welcome to the Setup menu. All of these setup pages are accessible in the left-hand panel, which groups certain features and tools into expandable sections. There is a search bar to find things quickly as well. Let's begin by talking about the Company Settings section, which is one of the first places you should go to set up a new Salesforce org. Some of the setup pages in this section that you should pay attention to are company information, business hours, holidays, fiscal year, and language settings. On the company information page, we can view and edit basic org information like the organization name and primary contact for the org, but we can also adjust some more important settings, such as the default locale, the default language, and the default time zone. Each user can have their own locale, language, and time zone settings, which we'll see here in a minute, but this is where you set the defaults for the org. On the company information page, we can also select the default currency, and whether or not we want to enable multiple currencies. And finally, we can view some usage and limits, such as the amount of data storage we used compared to the limit, the amount of file storage we've used compared to the limit, the number of Salesforce licenses we have and how many are left, and some other usage-based entitlements like the number of API calls per month. The business hours setup page allows us to set our organization business hours. We can set a specific time range for each day of the week, and we can even create multiple sets of business hours if we have different teams in different locations. Setting up business hours can be helpful with Service Cloud case handling. The holidays setup page allows us to create holidays that our organization observes. These are dates where the business hours will be suspended and are used in conjunction with the business hours we set up to show when the support team is available. The fiscal year setup page allows us to define when the year begins and ends for the business. Using the standard fiscal year functionality, you can choose a starting month and then the year that will be included in the naming of the fiscal year. Alternatively, you can set up a custom fiscal year, giving you more flexibility in how you define a fiscal year to be able to meet your financial planning requirements. The last setup page I will highlight within the company settings section is the language settings page. This is where we can enable different languages to be available for our users. This is not where we select the default language of the org, just which ones are available to assign to our users or for users to select. Another area of setup you should be familiar with is the user setup page. There is no point in setting up and configuring Salesforce if we don't have any users to enjoy it. If we search for users in setup and then open the page, we will see a list of users and we can create a new user. There are a lot of fields we can fill out, but only a few are required. Let me run through some of these very quickly. The email field should be a real, valid email address that the user can receive emails to. The username needs to be formatted like an email address, but doesn't have to match the email address field and does not have to be an email address you receive emails to. The reason this is important to know is because it also must be unique, meaning the same username cannot exist in any other org in any other Salesforce environment. If we scroll down, we can also add the user's time zone, locale, and language. Scrolling back up to the top, in the upper right, we need to determine the profile, the role, and the license type that this user should have. The most popular license would be Salesforce. We will talk about profiles and roles more in a few minutes, but know that these determine what the user will have permissions to do and see. The last thing I'll point out for user creation is this checkbox at the very bottom, which says generate new password and notify user immediately. So as an admin, if you uncheck this and save, then the user is not going to get notified and given access. Great, we have a user added to Salesforce, but how can we customize what they see? Let's briefly talk about the app menu, Lightning App Builder, global actions, and list views. While logged into Salesforce, a user will typically see a navigation bar across the top with different tabs they can click, and they will see a little 9-dot icon called the App Launcher. If they click on the App Launcher, they can switch between the Salesforce apps that are available to them, and they can also search for other items in Salesforce that they don't see in the navigation bar. So, as an admin, how do we configure what the user will see? We do that on the profile. If we go to Setup and search for profiles, we can view a list of existing profiles, or we can create a new profile. Every user has to be assigned a profile, which we saw earlier when we were creating a user. So maybe many users in our org are assigned this standard user profile. Well, if we want everyone who is assigned the standard user profile